Welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Maura Johnson, and in today's episode, I'm joined by Zach Myers, a cybersecurity expert and partner at McCarter English LLP in Indianapolis. Myers is co-leader of the firm's cybersecurity and data privacy team. Prior to his role at the firm, Myers served as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Indiana, where he spent time on issues of cybercrime and digital currency, developing ways to both combat and get ahead of security threats on the statewide and federal level. He previously served as an assistant U.S. Attorney in Maryland. Myers and I discuss his career in cybersecurity, how the area has changed, and how the state of Indiana is equipped to handle these technological threats. But before we get into the episode, here's a word from our sponsor, Taft.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
Mr. Myers, thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So can you start off by talking to me about your experience in cybercrime security and kind of what roles you've had in that sphere so far?
Sure. So prior to my current job, I spent about 14 years in the U.S. Department of Justice as an assistant U.S. attorney as well as the United States attorney here in the Southern District of Indiana. So as an assistant U.S. attorney, a line-level federal criminal prosecutor, I really focused my work on what we call technology and technology-facilitated crimes, which is everything these days. But that included serving as in the two districts I was in, both here in Indianapolis and the District of Maryland based in Baltimore. So I spent about 10 years as most of that time as a computer hacking and intellectual property prosecutor, as the DOJ coins the term, as well as a national security cyber specialist. And out in Maryland, where some of our friends at Fort Meade and otherwise in the government do a lot of national security cybercrime work. And so when I was in that district, we started what we call the National Security and Cybercrime section in that office to help do more of that work and build our client base as well as practice there. And I got to help lead that as the Cybercrime Counsel in the District of Maryland. And so I did a lot of investigations and prosecutions of traditional criminal cybercrime, whether it's hacking, cyber stalking, frauds enabled through technological means, doing investigations into international ransomware gangs and data breaches, as well as the things on the national security side where they're done by kind of nation state actors. But then after I was appointed and confirmed to come back home and be U.S. Attorney here, I got to help shape the policy direction of the office in terms of our investment with partnering with our law enforcement to further the work we were doing in investigating and protecting folks from cybersecurity threats and responding to them when they happen, and the complex issues around not just cybercrime but also cryptocurrency facilitated crime. And also as U.S. Attorney, I served as chair of the Attorney General's Advisory Subcommittee on Cybercrime and Intellectual Property. And so there we got to really take a look and help craft the Department of Justice's sort of strategy and policy around cybersecurity threats, around how we're going to deal with cryptocurrency and digital asset related issues from an enforcement and prevention and public safety standpoint and a regulatory standpoint, but also helping to write the playbook for all the U.S. attorneys' offices across the country of how should we be prioritizing our resources, what training and supports do the prosecutors doing this work need, how do we connect them and make sure they're communicating with each other, with their partners in main justice, with the right people, the FBI and other law enforcement, and doing so not just on the criminal side but national security. So that's a long answer to say it was a great ride in public service to get to do a lot of really interesting stuff in these emerging technology fields and getting to meet a lot of fantastic people in the public and private sector who are doing a lot of brilliant things in these areas. And I'm glad to be able to stay in that world and keep contributing, hopefully, to the public, even from this different chair that I sit in now.
Can you just talk about how, I guess, the job evolved, especially surrounding with how much cryptocurrency has grown and all these new technological threats? Can you expand upon how that changed the job a little bit?
So one of the things that we actually did in Maryland in partnership with a number of law enforcement agencies, Homeland Security Investigations, U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the Treasury Department, Office of Inspector General, a lot of agencies that are working on some of these issues, we created what we call the dark market and virtual currency task force because we were seeing, and it's still an issue today, but particularly in those mid to late 2010s, there's really this proliferation, I think most famously embodied by the Silk Road earlier in that decade. But there's this proliferation of just criminal marketplaces that the technology of the dark web, as people talk about it, the use of the onion router technology, these systems of proxies that just work differently in how information is stored and communicated on the internet to try to have layers of obfuscation, because the name of the game in investigations on the cybercrime side, on the cryptocurrency side, it's really about attribution. Like, it's one thing to find the information that's traversing the world, but it's another thing to say who sent it, who did it, who had the fingers on the keyboard. And there's all of these technologies that make that harder for investigators in some ways to figure out. And at that time period, they were using a number of these technologies in concert: cryptocurrency, the dark web, to set up bazaars, to sell drugs, to sell stolen identity information, stolen payment information, and on some of these forums to sell child exploitation material. All the crimes that you might think of that people would commit in the world, and content neutral. So it just lets you do all of the things that people are doing on the street, but at higher volume, at scale, at lower cost, and enabling these sort of professionalized criminal marketplaces to flourish. And so law enforcement was usually a lagging indicator, and those things bloom and then law enforcement responds. And so we were part of that law enforcement response to figuring out what are the technological tools that law enforcement needs, what are the relationships we need to have in the public and private sector in order to unravel crimes like this, what training do our investigators and agents and prosecutors need in order to successfully bring these cases and secure results in court. And not just, and this was part of the cybercrime strategy that we led when I was in the political side in terms of politically appointed. Law enforcement isn't political. We do our best to keep from that. Sorry, I'm still processing. It's only been a few months. But making sure that we are using the resources, making sure that the resources of the public are being used to not just secure arrests and prosecutions, but also to get prevention and to disrupt. Because a lot of these criminals that all of us now are facing are in other countries and are able to conspire together and cause tremendous harm to businesses and individuals right here at home. And it's really costly, not just in terms of money, but time and manpower for each and every one of those potential defendants to be identified, to be arrested. It depends on if they use the wrong communication facility at the wrong time, if they happen to vacation in the wrong country that might cooperate with legal process from the U.S. government. And so if you're just waiting for arrests, that's not enough. And so one of the things that we prioritized when I was U.S. Attorney in the cybercrime strategy was, for the Department of Justice as a whole, was an all-tools approach. What are the other things the government can do beyond and in addition to prosecutions? Using the government's authorities to shut down some of the infrastructure that criminals are using to conduct crime online, to interrupt and identify and seize proceeds of crime and cryptocurrency, things that are facilitating crimes, things that are the proceeds of crime. How do we bust up these networks even if we can't lay hands on people? And whether you're a victim working with your civil counsel on something like that, or you're a victim working with law enforcement, a lot of the challenges are still the same. And the threats are constantly evolving in this area, but the fundamental difference is, when I was a kid, I won't say when, but I guess older than I used to be, but the idea that a criminal sitting in Ukraine could work together with a criminal in Lithuania and another in Nigeria to extort a business in Muncie and successfully get money from that can't happen. But today, the technologies that bring us together, that let us work with suppliers, find customers, collaborate with people all over the world, those technologies are content neutral. And so the bad guys can use them too, because criminals are just like the rest of us. And what we're all facing now as citizens in this second, I guess technically third decade of the 21st century, is a world in which our front door is the whole world. That the attack surface is infinite, that a criminal sitting in those foreign countries can easily use the networks that we use to do our business and to collaborate and share images of our children with our grandparents. Those same systems can be used to take all of your money, to shut down your business remotely. And to extort you or your children and all these like terrible things in addition to all the good things that we can do. And technologies like cryptocurrency enable them to monetize that. Because even if a criminal was able to harm your business, extort individuals, how are they going to get paid? Even with $100 bills, like sacks of cash get big and heavy and are hard to smuggle. I know the drug trafficking organizations are very professional at moving bulk cash and reducing it to things, but even they are trying to like get it to the point where they're wiring money. Cryptocurrency is not in and of itself an evil from a law enforcement perspective. It's a different technology, and there are different pluses and minuses to the public in its use. And one of the pluses is for most cryptocurrencies, the most commonly used ones, there is a public and permanent ledger of every transaction. And so if you're able to de-anonymize, who had hands on the keyboard for this particular account, you can then look back and come up with all sorts of information to help pursue whether it's a civil claim or a criminal prosecution. But it's really easy for you extort someone who's got that business in Muncie and make them go out and buy some Bitcoin and send hundreds of thousands of dollars to these criminals sitting in this foreign country. And now they can do that. They don't have to like call up and send gift card numbers over the phone or other things that might be less efficient in terms of moving the proceeds of crime away from victims into the pockets of bad guys. And that technology has accelerated the ability of folks to do that in addition to whatever positive benefits it might have.
I would imagine that cryptocurrency has sped up the process of where did this money go? It's making things more efficient in a bad way, but also in a good way. But
whether it's artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, encryption, enhanced sort of communications systems and networks, all of these technological advances can be used for good or ill. And one of the things that it's hard for regulators to do, for law enforcement, but also people just doing their business and trying to protect themselves, to figure out is how do I maximize the benefits that I'm getting from these transformative technologies while also protecting myself, my business, and my family from those risks.
So now shifting to your new role at a law firm, can you just explain what your role is now and how that differs from the past when you were working in the government?
Absolutely. Today, I serve as a partner in the business litigation group of McCarter English LLP. It is a 400-plus lawyer, 180-year-old law firm that originated in New Jersey. But for those of us who are Hoosiers, it feels a little different because it is a 3-year-old law firm with a dozen and growing attorneys here in Indianapolis. But that was one of the really attractive things to me about the opportunity to join McCarter English, was being part of the growth of a new office of a larger institution that had that sort of depth and specialization across all the areas that big sophisticated clients who do the kinds of things that I want to be able to do for clients. But nothing truly important gets done by yourself. I've always felt like you need a team to work with. And so having a nationwide team across a dozen offices with all these different practice areas that I partner with was just an opportunity that I was excited to. It's not every day that there's a sort of newer office of a big established law firm opening in your hometown, and let's stay in the city that you love. And so it was just a unique opportunity as I was exiting government. I didn't plan to leave government. Obviously, that was outside of my control, but I knew when I chose to pursue becoming a United States attorney, having been a career AUSA, when you move from that career line prosecutor position into the politically appointed management, that you no longer are the civil service that is the backbone of the federal government and public service in general. You're a political appointee. You are there executing sort of the policies and priorities of the administration that appointed you. But of course, I was lucky enough to have bipartisan support in approaching that job. And I always tried to approach it from the Department of Justice's long-standing tradition of being apolitical and nonpartisan. And as they tried to pursue the work that we were doing for the public. Now, as I was moving into the private sector, one of the things I'd really enjoyed about being U.S. Attorney was that the office in Indianapolis had historically been wildly understaffed. There's 93 U.S. Attorney's offices, and for decades, it had been 93rd or 92nd in staffing per capita. The office was just not the right size for a metropolitan area, a a judicial district the size of the Southern District of Indiana. And so we really pursued vigorously with my team and across a number of other U.S. attorneys' offices that have been in the same position historically for a number of bureaucratic reasons I won't bore you with. But we really worked to find an opportunity to increase resources for those offices, because you get 93 of something, someone's going to be in 93rd, but 93rd maybe shouldn't be less than half of 45th. Mm-hmm. And so you try to squish that bell curve a little bit. And we were able to have some success there and grow the office numerically substantially, and being able to build that team and shape how are we going to change our practice, what areas are we going to seek to shift into. No one knocks the U.S. attorney from 1998. No one says, Judas Stewart, why didn't you have a cryptocurrency-focused prosecutor? The world changes, the threats change, and I'm sure my successor and my successor are going to be facing threats that weren't even on the radar today. And so you're always in the private sector and the public sector, you're always adjusting to the things that are happening. But that adjustment and that chance to build was really exciting to me, and was what I was looking for in my private practice as well. And so the chance to both lead and build were things that really spoke to me. And so McCarter English was seeking to grow its cybersecurity and data privacy practice, and they brought me on as co-leader of that sort of cross-disciplinary practice, along with a colleague of mine who just recently departed several years as being the top privacy lawyer for the FBI. And we've really worked together to help build up the team that we have already existing at the firm that's doing this important work for clients in this. I think any sort of C-suite is having discussions about cyber, and hopefully has been for years, but thinking not just about instant response and, oh my goodness, what do we do, and who do we have to notify, and how do we protect ourselves, and how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again. But hopefully, we always used to say in law enforcement, whether it was for a cyber threat or national security threat, you don't want the first conversation you have to be in the midst of the crisis. So you want to meet ahead of time. You want to have plans ahead of time. And so one of the things that I've been fortunate enough already to do, and look forward to doing more of, is working with clients before a problem happens and helping to talk about what does that incident response plan look like? What data do you have? What systems do you have? Where do they reside? What obligations do you have? How can you better protect them? But also, when the bad things happen, how can you make sure that you've mitigated to reduce the damage that is caused and protect yourself, your stakeholders, your customers, your clients? And also then on the back end, how do you deal with the aftermath of things? One of the things that I loved about my public service was that I did a lot of victim cases, and whether it was fraud cases or insider threat cases where people harmed the government agencies that they worked for and through that harmed the public, or cases of violent crime, cases of child exploitation and sexual trafficking, and working with people who had been wronged to help them try to remedy that. And also, there's a real human component to it. That's not just figuring out what are the facts and what is the law. It's working with people, which is something that I really like, and people who have gone through something difficult that almost always they're not a subject matter expert on some technical thing that's relevant to what happened. They're not the legal expert. Even when a business has been the victim of a cyber attack, they're trying to do their business. Even their chief information security officer is not there to figure out where the ransomware gang sits. And so being able to come in those moments of stress and trauma and crisis, and whether it's a victim of a financial fraud or someone who finds themselves on the wrong end of a government investigation and may not know what happened, may not have done anything wrong, or something in their organization might have happened that the leadership wasn't aware of or needs to do something to mitigate. But being able to come into those kind of high stress, high emotion crisis situations and being able to help people through what is happening to get the best outcome for them. It's not just, a lot of these things are business, and obviously not just the ones and zeros, but the dollars and cents matter, but also it's human beings, and being able to find a way in my private practice to hopefully make things better for folks who are having those bad days and helping the back end of that to look better. When you spend years of your life, time that you could have been with your friends and family and children, and instead you're trying to build this business, and then someone defrauds it, or some random criminals from nowhere steal all your data and threaten to release it to the world. That's not just business, that's personal. And so I hope I'm able to bring to the work that I get to do in the private sector, that same service mindset of helping people through difficult stuff and kind of that gratification of when you get to the other side of it, realizing that because of your partnership with them, that things maybe end up better than they were when you found them.
Would you say now in this private sector role that your clients are mostly like businesses where it's like an entity that you're now serving, obviously individuals within that, but can you talk about that a little bit?
And in the large law firm world, definitely most of the clients of the firm, and myself no exception, are whether it's the Fortune 500, Fortune 100 type companies or emerging companies that are trying to get off the ground or earlier in that growth phase, or even regional companies, but also entrepreneur individuals, and some individual defendants who might be on the other end of some sort of government scrutiny. I'm doing some criminal defense white-collar work in addition to my investigations work, helping folks with internal investigations and responding to government investigations. So a little bit of different buckets, but definitely a firm like ours is more of your clients end up being in the corporate world, but definitely some individual work as well.
I want to talk about just the state of Indiana and the state's ability to work on these crimes and deal with these what seem like kind of larger looming threats. Is there legislation? What's in place for the state of Indiana to kind of address things like cybercrime and cybersecurity that is on a state level, if that makes sense?
I smile because I just spent 14 years being completely unable to answer that question, prohibited from doing so.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I can actually answer it. What I'll say is that the government can't do this by themselves. And certainly the state government can't, the local government can't. You cannot expect the Perry County Prosecutor's Office and Sheriff's Department to figure out how to interdict successfully kilograms of fentanyl that are being sent by the Sinaloa cartel across the border into Indiana. You can't expect the Marion County Prosecutor's Office or the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office, notwithstanding their size and staffing and sophistication, to be able to successfully bring in for prosecution Russian hackers who are behind a data breach campaign. Like, these things depend on cooperation between all levels of government, but government and the private sector. And there are networks of attorneys and cybersecurity and information security professionals who work to try to protect governments, to try to protect individuals, try to protect businesses, because there's the state of Indiana and certainly the local governments of Indiana and government agencies of Indiana, let alone the federal government that itself is routinely the victim of some of these things. My national security background check information is allegedly sitting in the hands of Chinese hackers. And this is an unprecedented sort of threat that the world is facing as these technologies keep getting ahead of the security and not really having them built in. And we have all these wonderful new tools, but the good users back home in Indiana are now having the entire world able to attack them. And it's overwhelming, and it's overwhelming for the state. I don't know that state-specific legislation or regulation, when you're talking about international interconnected technology, I don't know if that I know a lot of states have their own data breach and data privacy statutes. And one of the reasons for that is because there isn't really a comprehensive one on the federal side here in the United States, the way that the EU has or the United Kingdom is working on. And so I think in the absence of kind of a federal statutory regime there, that there's a number of states that have tried to lay the groundwork and set the rules of the road. But the problem for a lot of businesses that, one of the things that we help at my firm sort of help them navigate is if you're sitting in Indiana and you have customers and are doing business in California and Connecticut and in the European Union, you're simultaneously having to navigate a number of different bodies of regulations intended to protect privacy and cybersecurity, and sometimes they're even conflicting.
Right.
And so it can be really confusing and complex. And that's why people hire lawyers like me and my partners. But it's frustrating because people are just trying to live their lives and start a business and build something for their families and their communities. And all of this, what seems like both red tape on the regulatory side, but also all these bad guys coming after them when all they were trying to do was do something positive for the economy and the community. It can be disheartening at times, but there's so much good being done and so many cool technologies and important advances being led all over the country, but particularly in my wonderful home state of Indiana, that overall, I think that the balance of things is positive. And I think that Indiana is in a position to be, with our leadership in sort of life sciences and biotechnology and logistics, that we're in a position, as long as we continue to think about protecting from these threats, that I think we're in a condition to continue to be very successful as a region and as a state.
Yeah. Are there any trends that you might see moving forward in the next few years in kind of cybersecurity, whether it's threats, protection? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. The threat is constantly evolving. I talked about how before we were focused on dark markets, but now there's other ways that are the predominant means of engaging in illicit sales online. Not that the old ones go away. But from a cybersecurity perspective, as we have gotten better and better at doing things like patching security flaws and sharing information when flaws in software that might enable breaches are known, and being able to get that out to the community. And the cybersecurity world, I think, has really gotten good about being interconnected, connected with law enforcement, about sharing sort of failures, because we can all learn from, hey, you bad guys got me this way, let's make sure that doesn't happen to you, or sharing the techniques and the practices of the bad guys so that we can all protect ourselves. But the bad guys are talking to each other too. And it's crazy. They've got sometimes like discussion forums where they're like talking about, oh, they've patched this hole. We all need to try this thing, that too. Criminals, again, are just like the rest of us. And like one example of how the threat has changed is that years ago, much more of what you heard about was ransomware attacks. And oh my gosh, they've encrypted all of our data and we've got to pay out this huge ransom or we're not going to be able to access our files anymore. But a lot of users now and a lot of governments have gotten more sophisticated about, well, we need secure, iterative backups of all of our data so that we can access it, so that if the bad guys lock down our systems, we'll say, too bad, so sad, we'll restore from 6 hours ago and we don't care what you have done and leave us alone, and we'll make sure to patch the hole that let you get in here in the first place. And so the bad guys said, okay, that's fine, but now we're going to steal your data. So even if you can get back in your systems, we're going to hold your data hostage. And if you don't pay us, then we're going to have these websites where we just launch all the data just into the wind, and everything that we stole, all your trade secret information, all the sensitive information for your patients, for your customers, the communications with your clients. So they target businesses like hospitals, like education, like law firms, accounting firms, and places that have sensitive data that, are really under the gun if, someone's just going to dump the data that's been stolen out into the world. And I'm sure we're going to continue to try to get better at protecting against that. And then the bad guys are going to find out what the next scam is going to be, because the criminals are always going to try to enrich themselves. And it's tough because you can have all of the protections that you want, but if someone from some other country or using an AI deepfake voice calls up and says, hi, this is Daryl from security. We just had a cyber attack and I need you to open this website so that I can download the patch to protect your system. And this scam's happening right now. And they'll then all of a sudden, now they're in the system and now they're stealing data, and the user had no idea and thought they were doing the right thing. And no matter how much training you have, no matter how many phishing email fire drills you do inside of a company, it's what we used to say in law enforcement, we're in a zero failure position, because the bad guys only need to get one user to click on the wrong link, to download the wrong file, to tell the wrong person over the phone the wrong thing. And the good guys have to be right 100% of the time, but also design systems assuming that some days someone's going to be wrong. And so you have to try to protect against when the thing happens. But there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of risk out there. There's a lot of danger. And spending most of my career in positions where if something hit my desk, it's because something bad has already happened. It's nice to spend a little more of my time with, let's plan for before something happens. Yeah. But even when I'm working with folks after something bad has happened or figuring out if something bad has happened, it's also got to remind yourself that you're seeing a self-selected subset of the world, and not to be like all sunshine and rainbows, but there's a lot of good things going on out there. And if you get a little too down reading about seeing kind of all the negative, just hang out with your kids or watch our outstanding most nights Indiana Fever. Go out there and play some games. Yeah. Watch the Pacers have an amazing run. There's a lot of good things to be happy about right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. Myers, for joining me and for answering all my questions. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. You can find more legal news from around the state on our website at theindianalawyer.com. There you can subscribe to our newsletters and find podcasts from across the IBJ Media Company. You can also follow us on social media.